This book is called The True Believer by Eric Hoffer, first edition in the original slipcovers, and it also happens to be signed by Mr. Hoffer, which I love signed books. They're my favorite. This one I got for Steal of a Deal was only $1,200 on eBay, and it's about how mass movements are created. It's awesome. Towards the beginning of us starting ClickFunnels journey, and I knew when we built ClickFunnels, I wasn't trying to just sell a software product. I was like, I want to create a movement, and somebody told me that there's all these books on how dissected how different cults were built and different mass movements and big businesses, and you should read them. And there were a bunch of them I was reading, and a lot of them were good. Actually, my wife and I went on a trip to Kenya, and on the way out the door, I grabbed this book. It was not the first edition, it was a newer edition. And about the time I was writing my book, Expert Secrets, I remember we were on this bumpy road. My wife had fallen asleep. We're on this like crazy bumpy road, and I'm sitting there reading this book, and I'm trying to highlight stuff, and my hand's going all over the place, and I'm reading this, and like every line, I was like highlighting that line, and the next line, and I'm like, this is insane. And started going through all the things that are essential to create a mass movement. And it started talking about all different types of mass movements and how they work. Anything from like, political movements to businesses to religious movements, both like the positive side and the negative side. And as I was reading this, it became the foundation for what eventually became the Expert Secrets book. Because the Expert Secrets book, when I wrote that, the goal wasn't just like how to become an expert, like how to tell your story, like those things are in there, but I was like, true experts have people that follow them, right? They have a movement, like that's the definition of it. I remember looking at like what we had done with ClickFunnels. It wasn't just Russell being Russell, like that wasn't what it was about. It never was about me. It was about the people, it was about the funnel hackers, about the movement we created. And so Expert Secrets was, yes, you're an expert, but the only reason why you're an expert is because your job is to find a group of people you're supposed to serve and to bring them to you. And so when I read The True Believer, I was like learning all these principles about how mass movements have been created and like how the pattern was repeated over and over and over again. It became the foundation for the Expert Secrets book. And that's why I love True Believer. I have a bad habit. Whenever anybody recommends a book, I instantly, as fast as I can, grab my phone. I just buy 100% of the books that people recommend. I don't read them all. I wish I could. I read as many as I can. But what normally happens is that the good books will bubble to the top, right? Like I'll buy them all, but then if someone mentions it one time and I hear it again and again 3 or 4 times, then it's like, okay, I need to prioritize this book because like 3 or 4 people I respect have all talked about it. And so that's kind of how I start for me. Then typically for me, what I do is I start with an audiobook. The hardest part's reading initially. So I'm like, do I get into this, listen to the audiobook? So I always buy the physical book and the audiobook 100% of the time. I listen to the audiobook, and if I listen for 10 or 15 minutes and I'm hooked, that's when I say, okay, I'm going to commit back to the physical book, and then I go and get the book. And I like reading and highlighting. True Believer is a book that just had come up 3 or 4 times in different conversations about different things, and that's why it had risen to the top. I always travel with like 3 or 4 books just depending, and it rose to the top, and I grabbed it. So that's kind of how I find out what books to read. Because there's so many books, like you can't read all of them. And so I wait for the best stuff to bubble to the top. But some of the principles that were powerful for me, the first one, you look at the traditional world, what happens is like you go and you get an entry-level job, right? And you work your way up and you get to the next level, and you get to the next level, and you're slowly like ascending through the levels. And he said that no mass movement is built that way, right? A mass movement is all about like a charismatic leader coming in and disrupting that, right? It's not about like slowly advancing. It's about changing and like moving directions. And it was interesting to me because I was thinking about that, like how many people in the corporate world are sitting there like waiting and they're slowly moving going up the corporate ladder, building, over time. And when he talked about movements, he's like, it's not the way it works. It's not like people are going to slowly move up to you. Like you can start these things radically and very quickly by putting a flag in the ground and showing people why that's wrong, why what they're doing is not the right way, creating a new opportunity where you're going to take people and move them away from the existing thing. And it's like advancement is not the key. It's a new opportunity. So that was like a big one for me. The second big one, I want to actually read this one because this is one that just struck me in a really interesting way because a lot of the mass movements he talks about in here are religious by nature, but not all of them are. This was kind of something that popped out. He calls this unifying agents. So how do you unify a movement? How do you get people to come together? And this is so cool because he said the most powerful unifying agent, the thing that unifies people the most is hatred, which is kind of a, like, wait, what? Hatred? I thought it was going to be like this positive vision or this mission. It's like, no, the thing that unifies people the most is hatred. He says, hatred is the most accessible and comprehensive of all the unifying agents. It says mass movements can rise and spread without a belief in God, but never without the belief in a devil. And so what he's talking about here is for you to create a mass movement, like you have to create a common enemy. Like that's part of it, right? If you look at any good mass movement, there's always like us versus them. Like that's what separates a movement and gets people to actually move and to follow with you, right? So you think about that, it's like, okay, think about religious, right? You always have like, there's always God and the devil. Like there's always 2 different things, right? And you look at how most religions work, like the way they're getting people to move towards God is by focusing on the hatred of the devil. Like you don't want the devil, this is gonna be bad, right? When I was doing the research for Expert Secrets, I was trying to find a lot of examples because I didn't want people to be like, oh, that's a religious example, but I'm different, right? So I remember I was like, I'm gonna find a religious. So I looked at Christ. If you look at Christ, like he was very divisive. He said, I came with the sword to divide. Like he wasn't trying to make peace, he was trying to divide people. And then you look at Christ, who I believe is the greatest of us all, right? And you look on the opposite side, like the evil, you look at Hitler. Like, what did Hitler do? Like, Hitler was the same way. Like, they had a common good, but they had a common enemy that he attacked the whole time, right? Two different people, but same tactics. And I was like, okay, I don't want to talk about religion anymore. I want to talk about different topics. So we started shifting to businesses, right? You look at like what Steve Jobs did with Apple. It's like, hey, here's Apple, but then who were they fighting against? And so like I was looking at just business, religious, political things. Like politics are huge too. You see this every single time, right? Democrats, Republicans, like what are they doing? They are picking a common enemy. And like if you look at the last political cycle, it was a lot less based on like, look at my candidate, how great they are. And like most of the messaging was, look how bad this other candidate is. Like that was the reality of the entire election cycle, right? It was all focused on hatred, right? Because it's the greatest unifying object that we have, according to Eric Hoffer. Devil for ClickFunnels, it shifted over time. Initially, when we first launched, it was us trying to prove that ClickFunnels were a thing. So the devil became like anything that wasn't a funnel. Like websites are dumb. Like we did this whole death of the website campaign, stuff like that. So at one time, that's what it was. Other times, we actually picked companies. Like I remember thinking, okay, I'm very competitive. So I'm always like, who's the next person I got to beat? Like when I was wrestling or I want to be a state champ, like who's the state champ? And I would think about that person. I would dream about them. I'd put their picture on my wall. Like there wasn't a moment in my life didn't go past that I wasn't thinking about how I could beat that person, right? Won my state title. The next thing was the national level. Like it was like obsessive for me. And so when we were launching ClickFunnels, like after we started getting some traction, I was like, okay, who's ahead of us? And for me at the time, there was a company called LeadPages. Most people haven't heard about LeadPages anymore because we came pretty aggressively after them, right? They had just gotten like, I think $30 or $40 million in funding. And I was like, that's our competitor. And so we were very aggressive trying to surpass them. Positioning psychology, like different brands in a business, like number two always attacks number one, right? Pepsi always attacks Coke, but Coke never even acknowledged that Pepsi exists, right? And so for us, it's like when LeadPages was the target, like we were talking about them, we were trying to beat them, till eventually we passed them, and then we can't talk about them ever again. Like they're now dead to us, we can't talk about them. And then our next target was like, okay, who's our next biggest person? It's Infusionsoft, right? And so that became the common enemy that we united against. We fought against this common enemy, right? After we surpassed them, we stopped talking about them, and then it started transitioning. For us, it was like, as opposed to doing like actual companies or brands. Now in my older age, I don't feel as comfortable doing that kind of stuff. I don't think I would do that again in the future, but it became more based on ideas. So we started fighting like venture capitalists versus bootstrappers. And like we became bootstrappers, like our community, our people, versus like venture capitalists who are cheating. Like they don't even run real businesses. They have horrible ideas, but they're just cheating by getting money, right? Like they became the common enemy. I did a whole presentation at Funnel Hacking Live about being a bootstrapper, and people got, they went around that. After I read Napoleon Hill's Outwitting the Devil, he talks about, which by the way, Napoleon Hill's great, that's creating the common enemy, but he talks about the devil is trying to get people to become drifters. And so for our community, I did a whole presentation on being driven versus being a drifter. Obviously, I wanted people to be driven, but the focus was on not becoming a drifter. And that became the common enemy. I use it a lot over and over and over again in different areas, different aspects, different places, but realizing that you have more power to unify people when you're focusing on hatred and on the devil than you ever do on focusing on the positive. One of the caveats I always give people who are in a lot of our higher end events is like, you have to be careful because you can use these powers for good or for evil, right? And you've seen it, like you look at the mass movements throughout time, like these principles have been used for good and for evil. And I think one of the biggest problems people have a lot of times is they don't know what they're doing, right? They get started, they start doing these things, start applying these principles, and they're doing it with a good heart. Fame is a scary thing. Like you see people who start having success and people start following, and then all of a sudden they start drinking their own Kool-Aid, they start believing their own bios, and all these things start happening, and that's when things start shifting, and that's when you see these big movements, these big companies, and then they crash and burn. I think I was lucky when I got started early on. I started building my first company, we started growing, and this is, 14, 15 years ago, pre-ClickFunnels. And I got to the spot in my life where I literally was doing the same thing. When you're building a movement like a true believer, it's like it always leads with a charismatic leader. Like that's step number one, expert secrets. If you look at the diagrams, like step number one is an attractive character. So you lead with that. And so I was building my company, it was building and everything. I started getting that spot where, again, I believed my own bio. I was drinking my own Kool-Aid. Like I thought it was something special. And I remember about that time is when my entire company collapsed. Like it fell apart overnight. I had to fire almost 100 people in a day. We had to move from a big, huge office building to shrink down to this little tiny thing. We were scrambling just to keep alive. And I remember going through that process, and it was very, very painful. I remember thinking during that time, I was like, okay, I now know that this was not me. There's a lot of other external forces besides me that created this thing, right? Including God, which was one of the biggest things for me. I'm like, I now know that what he gives, he can take away. And I was like, if I'm ever in a spot where I have a chance to build something big again, I have to be very, very careful and be humble, because there's a scripture that says that either you can humble yourself or he will humble you. And that verse scares me to death, because I'm like, okay, I don't want to be humbled, so I need to maintain and be humble. And I think that's one of the biggest things is like when you get put in a spot of leadership, like you you build an audience, you have people following you, like you have a big responsibility. And the key is like you have to remain humble. Like that was not something that you created, it was something you were given. It's remembering those things as you're trying to lead the movement and not making it about you. As soon as it becomes about you, that's when it shifts from a very positive thing to a very negative thing. If you guys want a copy of all of my notes from True Believer, as well as some of my doodles, and also the doodles that I put inside of Expert Secrets on how I see creating a mass movement. Again, it came initially from this book, True Believer. There's 3 things every mass movement must have. If you haven't read Expert Secrets, it's a charismatic leader, it is a future-based cause and a new opportunity. I have the doodles where I kind of show that from Expert Secrets. I'm gonna put all those down in the show notes down below. If you click on that, send you out a PDF that's got all my notes from the book, plus all the stuff from Expert Secrets, so you can see how to actually apply this to your business and your movement as you are trying to build your following of people and change their lives. It all comes down to these very core, very simple principles. And when you learn how to use them good, you can change a lot of people's lives, and in the process, it'll change your life as well. Of my 3 core books I've written so far, Expert Secrets is the one that sold the most. And I think the reason why is because a lot of people don't understand funnels yet. So .com secrets might be over the head, or traffic secrets, but like most people know that that they have a message, right? A lot of people feel called. I always tell people that I believe that entrepreneurs, people who follow me a lot of times, you've heard what my friend Alex Sharfin calls the call to contribution. Like you feel this thing, I want to serve people, I want to help people. And usually it's someone who's gone through something really hard in their life. It could be a trial they went through, or maybe problems they struggle with, and they came out on the other side and they've had success. They want to go back and serve the people who are just like them, right? And they I have these ideas, I have this experience. A lot of times they don't maybe not consider themselves an expert yet, but I want to be an expert. I want to share these things. I went through these things and I've learned so much I can help other people. And so when they see the book Expert Secrets, I think it's the one that they connect with. Oh my gosh, I'm not an expert yet, but maybe that book will help me to figure out how to take these ideas and package them in a way where I can help people as well. And so it's interesting. I love watching, again, people's YouTube videos and stuff. And you see it in the book on the shelf on the back, and it's crazy. If you look at the who's who of who's read this book, it always blows my mind. We at Funnel Hacking Live, we had Andy Grammer come and actually do a presentation. I hadn't met him yet. I didn't get him in backstage because they have all their security team and everything. So the first time I saw him, he came on stage, he sings the first song, and then grabs the microphone. He literally tells the entire audience, hey, Russell, I read Expert Secrets during COVID and it changed my life. And I was like, what? This is it? How did you never tell me this? You should have messaged me. It's just really cool to see how many people have read this book and used it to find their voice and to be able to find their audience and their tribe and bring them together and actually create a movement of people's lives who they can actually change. And it's just been very fulfilling to watch this book come from an idea to something now that's been, hundreds of thousands of copies have been sold around the world.